Hi, this is Andrew Sears again. And this next session, I'm going to talk about what a moonshot vision for growth of Christian higher education globally might look like. Now, the term moonshot is often used in Silicon Valley and a lot of startups, and the idea is it comes from John F. Kennedy whenever he said we're going to put a man on the moon within a decade. And a lot of people like to look at, what is a really broad vision that might get all of us, moving in a similar direction. And, looking at the framework that I provided in some of my past presentations, really there's three possible futures for Christian higher education. One is where technology platforms become the dominant future, and there you might see a 40% decline of Christian higher education. The other is that state mega universities might become the dominant future, and essentially Christian higher education gets nationalized. And the third option is that we might see tremendous growth in Christian higher education. So what I'm going to present is how we might actually get to that growth in a moonshot in that direction. Now, one of the things that's important to recognize is that where are we in the adoption cycle for post-secondary degrees? So whenever you have a new technology or a new innovation, what you have is different stages that goes through. And I would argue that in the global adoption cycle for post-secondary degrees, we're not even through the early adopter stage. If you look at market penetration globally for degrees, it's 6.7% according to a Harvard study. And ultimately, I think what we're getting ready to do is we're getting ready to do something that Jeffrey Moore coined the term crossing the chasm. And I think there's going to be a new form of higher education that's going to be the dominant form globally, where there's going to be new models for post-secondary education that's going to be different. And that's how we're going to get the rest of the early adopters and the early majority. And I think the best model, honestly, that I've seen out there of a potential vision for that is Arizona State University. They have, I think, the most comprehensive model for a university, and they show it in a set of concentric circles where at their core, and not all universities are going to do all these things, but I think that this is actually a really interesting model for the global Christian higher education ecosystem. So how do we together, as Christian higher education institutions, recreate something like this? So at their core, they have knowledge, so that's the base of research. And then this area here, so the green area is knowledge, and then this first ring is full immersion on campus. So that's traditional campus. Then the second is online. The idea that that's going to be serving more. So they call it digital immersion, online, technology enhanced. And then the third tier, which is much larger, is what they're calling essentially their MOOCs, the digital immersion, massive open technology. And then the fourth tier, really what that is it is largely through mass media or mass digital media. And I think that this is a very interesting model to look at. I think another model that kind of follows this is Jesus kind of had this tiered ministry model. I think a lot of churches replicate this. So he had his 12 disciples, he had his 120 disciples, so a larger group, and then he had the 5,000 or the crowds. So the question is, what would that look like for Christians? And this essentially is the moonshot vision. So how do we get to 25 million students in accredited Christian degree programs by 2030? So that would be a 400% growth. And ultimately, I think we have to be thinking about these concentric rings. So the biggest ring is what I'm going to call the digital Christian ecosystem and the global digital ecosystem. And you might, put that also, even bigger than that is the global body of Christ, right? And the idea is that you're going to try to drive people from that. So that would be all forms of Christian media. And then you're going to try to drive them to the next tier. So that would be courseware. So Third Millennium, they've invested $34 million in the past decade or so in developing their courses and distributing them. And their goal is to reach 100 million people. MOOCs have already reached 100 million people. So then the next tier is how do you move them from that to something deeper? And MOOCs now are moving to the idea of micro degrees. So MIT has their MicroMasters, and so that is alternative credit. How do you actually grant credit for that? And that's where we have the GC4 initiative, and there's other initiatives out there. So you get them from just doing courseware to credit. And then the next tier is, we realize that just doing things online is going to be limited. So how can we use unbundled business models that I've talked about in another presentation and micro campuses as a way to add, more of this blended education. And there you're going to go down. So if you start at 100 million for the courseware and 10 to 50 million for alternative credit, you're probably going to go down to 5 to 20 million for blended modular. And on campus, Christian higher education, I think, is going to stay about the same. I think it's probably a reasonable goal for the next 15 years. So that's ultimately how you get to this 25 million. Now I'm going to show this instead of concentric circles. I'm going to show this in a pyramid, so I can add a little more detail. So you start with this Christian digital ecosystem that's going to be serving billions. And there, what I'm really talking about is, it's going to be the Christian use of secular platforms, Christian material on YouTube, on iTunes, on, apps, on the web. But then there's going to be massive Christian platforms like the Bible app. There's a number of Christian subscription services. And then there's probably going to be new platforms that have yet to be identified, Christian platforms. Then, so you build on that, and then you try to integrate in courseware. And these courseware is going to be free. And you're going to be providing things like first-year Bible courses, Christian integration courses, and you're also going to be working with secular courseware, where you might take, say, a calculus course and rebundle it into a Christian program. And then the next tier is this alternative credit, and most often that's going to be used for college years 1 through 3. And the average cost for that is going to be, I would say, about $100 a year. And you may wonder, how do you get to $100 a year? Well, part of how you get to $100 a year is you start with courseware that people have invested hundreds of millions of dollars in developing. And then you're able to work with coaches and other things at greatly reduced cost to provide this alternative credit. And you're going to have multiple ways that you would do that. You can do that through micro campuses, through online and mobile delivery. And then at the top, you're going to have bachelor's programs. And there, I think the average cost for these bachelor's, primarily degree completion programs, would be about $1,000 a year, and you're going to offer the full range of university degrees. So again, that's another vision of how you could get to 25 million students in accredited degree programs. So what are some of the assumptions that go into designing for a Moonshot Vision? Whenever you're designing, it's good to have, okay, here's the assumptions that I'm using. And some of these assumptions, may be wrong, but trying to make them explicit. So one of the assumptions is that 80% of the growth of Christian higher education will happen in developing countries. That's based on the projections of where the rest of the growth of Christian higher education is going to happen already globally. Based on the income levels, those students are going to require price points of $100 to $1,000 per year for Christian higher education. Some countries might support a little more, but the point is it's going to be a lot lower than what we're used to in Western countries. I believe that another assumption is that accredited credentials will continue to be important to this market through 2030 and will be essential for access to jobs. I talk to a lot of people who, they studied at MIT or Harvard, and they say, oh, our degree is going to be important in the future. And while I'm supportive of disruptive innovation, I think that especially for the poor, they're going to need that credential. There's a reason why often, if the poor are going to church, they will dress up. It's because they have to send stronger signals to the market, or if they're going to a job, they have to dress up because they have to send stronger signals to the market so that they can, gain the additional access. Whereas someone who's, say, in the top 1% globally, it may be less important for them to have a degree, but for the rest of the world, I think it's going to be pretty important for decades to come. Then the other is that the primary growth market, even though it's going to be in developing countries, it's going to be this emerging middle class. So the projection is that there's going to be 5.9 billion middle class globally And I believe, based on current projections, almost all will have affordable broadband mobile internet access by 2030. So some of the other assumptions, I think that we should design for online, mobile, blended, and offline delivery methods. We don't know which of those is going to be dominant, but probably all will be useful. And I think that, the assumption that the majority of the growth of Christian higher education is going to happen in these alternative models, where I think traditional Christian higher education most likely, at best will have slight growth, but many, people are concerned that it may decline. I think that, the foundation for this is going to be free, open, and unbundled courseware. And there's a lot of courseware that's out there. Sometimes it's not free, sometimes it's not open, sometimes it's not unbundled, but I think it's going to be essential to have all of those. And I think the last assumption is the idea is that the answers don't need to be invented. They need to be found, funded, and scaled. And that's part of the reason why I did this asset map, because I wanted to show what are the things that are already out there. I think in many cases, the future is here, as William Gibson said, it's just not evenly distributed. So we need to figure out how do we scale that. So summarizing this using the framework that I provided before, you have the traditional system that is Bible schools, Christian liberal arts colleges, Christian universities, and seminaries. Then you have this unbundled disruptive ecosystem that's made up of a lot of different components that are each different bundles. The dominant business model for courseware in the distribution is going to be freemium or free, and it's going to be donor-based. And the dominant business model at the top is going to be for fee, and it could be anywhere from $10 a year to $5,000 a year. Now, at the bottom, basically the assumption going into this is that the bundled traditional model, it could grow by 5%, it could shrink by 5%, but it's starting at a larger base, whereas the non-credit students are starting at a lower base, and the ones that are actually doing alternative credit is even lower. But the projected growth, I think you could have projected growth in any given year of 50 to 1,000%. So here, if I had to say, okay, what would you say, how do we move forward for a moonshot? And ultimately what you have to do is you have to do lean startup experiments, and you have to see what things work. And I think that through this asset map, I've shown a lot of the pilots that have been out there. And I think what we need to do is we need to scale them up. So if I were in front of someone who is wealthy and they said what should I fund, and trying to do something that's going to be general for the ecosystem, not just for my institution, this is what I would say. I would say, let's get a $5 million funding pilot, and the goal would be to scale the alternative Christian credit ecosystem to add 10,000 students. So you're talking about $50 a student, and you're going to basically try to serve all levels of the ecosystem. So at the base, the courseware providers, and even though I'm not a courseware provider, I'm actually giving them the biggest share, because I think they might be the most critical to this, providing them $2 million to get 10,000 students in alternative credit program, and that would be $50 per student. And I think it's actually really important to tie outcomes to the money, because I think that often we can get caught up in pursuing what is called vanity outcomes, where a lot of the MOOCs talk about they have 100,000 students in them, but almost none complete. I think that it's important that we actually put some more rigorous outcomes in those things, so that we don't just get 100 million students that are using Christian courseware, but they all just click on it and look at it for 10 seconds. So then I think the next tier would be to have alternative credit mechanisms, and there you might have $1 million to get 2,000 students, and there the end goal is, alternative credit really is only good if it's accepted by accredited Christian institutions. So you would provide $1 million to get 2,000 students through these alternative credit mechanisms to Christian institutions. Then you would have church and ministry microcampuses, and I think those are a critical model. $1 million to get 500 students to complete a one-year program. And then at the accredited degree programs, and some students to get the accredited degree path. They could go through a micro-campus or not. But on the accredited degree path, what I would say is $1 million to accept alternative credit with 1,000 degrees completed. So that would be $1,000 per degree. And the idea is that any institution could apply for this. And I don't know whether these outcomes are exactly right. I'm trying to pick some outcomes just to show that it would be outcome driven. And the idea is that institutions could self-select based on, can they help get us to that goal of, scaling the alternative credit ecosystem. So anyway, I don't know who the potential funders for this might be, but I want to just get this out there as a potential moonshot. And, I know a lot of other people probably have a lot of other moonshots. I know there's probably a lot of components of this that are going to be wrong, but I wanted to get it out there so we could start dreaming and thinking about it. I would love to get your feedback on this. So please join the Christian Higher Education Innovation Alliance email list and provide your feedback. Thanks a lot.